Rare earth elements are some of the most critical materials underpinning modern technology and industry. Despite their misleading name, rare earth metals are relatively abundant in the Earth's crust. However, they are seldom found in concentrations that make mining economically viable, making their extraction and processing both challenging and costly. These 17 elements, including neodymium, dysprosium, yttrium, and lanthanum, play an indispensable role in manufacturing a vast range of high-tech devices, from smartphones and electric vehicle motors to wind turbines, military systems, and advanced electronics. The global economy relies heavily on a steady, secure supply of these rare earth metals. Yet the supply chain is precariously concentrated. China currently dominates the global rare earth industry. It controls over 70% of the world's rare earth mining and over 85% of the global refining and processing capacity, giving it a near monopoly on these critical materials. This dominance is the result of decades of strategic investment in rare earth mining, refining infrastructure, and downstream manufacturing capabilities. While other countries once led in rare earth production, environmental concerns, economic competition, and regulatory challenges caused many to reduce or close their operations, leaving China as the primary supplier to the world. But what if China suddenly stops exporting rare earth elements? Whether triggered by geopolitical conflicts, trade disputes, environmental policy changes, or a strategic decision to prioritize its own domestic industries, a halt or severe restriction on rare earth exports from China would trigger a global crisis that affects industries, governments, economies, and consumers worldwide. Today, we explore the wide-ranging consequences of such a scenario, the vulnerabilities it would expose, and the global efforts underway to mitigate these risks. To fully understand the gravity of a Chinese rare earth export ban, it is important to grasp why China holds such a dominant position. Rare earth elements are not only difficult to mine, but their refining and processing require highly sophisticated chemical techniques. The process generates significant environmental hazards, including radioactive waste and toxic byproducts. Due to these challenges, most Western countries scaled back or ceased rare earth mining and refining operations starting in the 1980s and 1990s, due in part to strict environmental regulations and cost concerns. China, on the other hand, invested heavily in building a vertically integrated supply chain encompassing mining, separation, refining, and manufacturing of rare earth-based components. It also tolerated environmental degradation to a much greater extent, enabling lower production costs. This investment, combined with lax environmental oversight, allowed China to dominate the global market. Even countries with known rare earth deposits, such as the United States, Australia, and Russia, have remained reliant on China for refined, rare earth materials necessary for high-tech manufacturing. If China were to suddenly stop exporting rare earth metals, the immediate impact on the global supply chain would be profound. Critical industries that depend on rare earth materials would face acute shortages. Electric vehicle, EV manufacturers, smartphone and computer producers, wind turbine builders, and the defense industry would all feel the ripple effects. Electric vehicles, hailed as a major solution to combat climate change, rely on rare earth magnets made from neodymium and dysprosium in their motors. A shortage of these materials would lead to production delays or increased costs for EV manufacturers, slowing the adoption of green transportation and undermining efforts to reduce carbon emissions. Wind turbines, which similarly depend on rare earth magnets for efficient energy generation, could face shortages that limit renewable energy capacity growth. The consumer electronics sector would be hit hard as well. Smartphones, laptops, flat-screen televisions, and other gadgets require rare earth components for their displays, batteries, and processors. Supply disruptions would drive up prices, create delays, and potentially reduce the availability of these products worldwide. The defense sector is another critical area vulnerable to rare earth shortages. Military technologies such as precision-guided missiles, jet engines, radar systems, and advanced communication devices all rely on rare earth materials. An export ban from China would jeopardize the operational readiness and technological edge of militaries worldwide, especially those of the United States and its allies. This could spark a scramble to secure existing stocks, develop alternatives, and accelerate domestic production efforts. The economic fallout from a Chinese rare earth export ban would be far-reaching. Global markets would react sharply with prices for rare earth elements skyrocketing due to the sudden scarcity. Inflationary pressures would spread to industries reliant on these materials, raising costs for end consumers. Manufacturing sectors would face delays and supply chain disruptions, reducing productivity and profits. Countries heavily dependent on China's rare earth exports would urgently seek alternative sources. Australia, home to significant rare earth deposits and currently the second largest global producer, would ramp up mining efforts. The United States has restarted rare earth mining at the Mountain Pass mine in California, but the capacity is still insufficient to meet global demand. Expanding rare earth mining and refining outside China involves significant challenges. Environmental regulations, high costs, and technical hurdles slow down the development of new operations. Moreover, the refining and separation process is highly specialized. Most rare earth mining outside China produces concentrate ores that must be shipped to China for processing due to a lack of local refining facilities. This dependency is a critical vulnerability that countries are only now beginning to address. The geopolitical consequences of a rare earth export cutoff by China would be profound. Rare earth elements are not just commodities, they are strategic resources and geopolitical leverage points. China's ability to restrict supply gives it powerful bargaining chips in trade negotiations and political disputes. Historically, China has used rare earth export restrictions as a diplomatic tool. In 2010, during a territorial dispute with Japan over the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, China temporarily cut off rare earth exports to Japan, causing global supply shocks and pushing prices up. Such actions demonstrate how rare earths can be wielded as geopolitical weapons. If China were to escalate export restrictions more broadly, affected countries might respond with retaliatory measures, worsening diplomatic tensions. The global community would likely see efforts to diversify rare earth supplies through new alliances, mining projects in Africa, South America, and Central Asia, and increased investments in domestic production. Recycling rare earth metals would become an urgent priority. Currently, only a small fraction of rare earth elements are recovered from end-of-life products like electronics, magnets, and batteries. Advances in recycling technologies could help reduce dependency on primary mining and provide a more sustainable supply. Governments and companies would likely increase funding for research into efficient and economically viable recycling processes, as well as establishing programs to collect and process used electronics at scale. Another potential response would be accelerated research into alternative materials that can replace rare earths in key applications. Scientists are exploring new magnetic materials that avoid reliance on scarce rare earth elements. But currently, few alternatives match their performance. Breakthroughs in material science could dramatically reshape industries and reduce vulnerabilities in the supply chain. The energy transition could be slowed due to rare earth shortages. Renewable energy technologies such as wind turbines and electric vehicles rely heavily on rare earth magnets for efficiency. If these materials become scarce or prohibitively expensive, the adoption of clean energy technologies could stall. This would prolong dependence on fossil fuels and exacerbate climate change risks. Consumer markets would also feel the strain. Increased production costs would lead to higher prices for everyday devices, and manufacturers might be forced to redesign products to use fewer rare earth elements or lower quality substitutes. This could reduce device performance and lifespan, impacting consumers globally. Ironically, increased mining activities outside China could raise environmental concerns. Rare earth mining and processing are associated with pollution, habitat destruction, and radioactive waste. China's dominance partly stems from its willingness to accept environmental degradation that other countries are reluctant to tolerate. Expanding mining operations elsewhere would require strict environmental safeguards to prevent replicating these issues on a global scale. Long-term, a Chinese export ban would trigger a major realignment of the global rare earth supply chain. Countries would likely establish strategic stockpiles of rare earth metals to buffer against future supply shocks. Multinational consortiums might be formed to pool resources, share technology, and coordinate mining and refining projects. Technological innovation would also be key. Automation and more efficient chemical processing techniques could reduce the environmental footprint and costs of rare earth production outside China. Governments may offer incentives to encourage private investment in this sector. China's own economy could be affected by such a move as well. While it would gain leverage by controlling global supply, disrupting critical global supply chains could hurt Chinese exporters who depend on stable trade relations. Retaliation from affected countries through tariffs, sanctions, or supply chain restructuring could damage China's economic growth. This complex interplay makes China's decision to restrict exports a high-stakes gamble with far-reaching consequences. In conclusion, a halt in Chinese rare earth exports would trigger a complex crisis impacting technology, defense, energy, economics, environment, and geopolitics. The global dependence on China's rare earth industry highlights the critical need for diversification, innovation, and sustainable practices. The path forward involves increasing rare earth mining and refining outside China, investing heavily in recycling and alternative materials, fostering international cooperation to secure supply chains, and balancing economic growth with environmental stewardship. The rare earth supply chain is a strategic vulnerability that no country or industry can afford to ignore in today's technology-driven, interconnected world. By understanding these dynamics, policymakers, businesses, and consumers can better prepare for potential disruptions and work toward a more resilient and sustainable future. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of global resources, geopolitics, and the future of technology.